5, 6. No, I think we're good. Welcome everybody to Let's Make It Weird. My name is Matt.
I'm Nick.
I'm Jake.
And Shane.
Yeah, all right. It's been a little while since Shane's been on the podcast.
Special guest.
Yeah, I think it was, what was it?
Scary Stories.
Scary Stories. Yeah, that was actually a really good one. I had a lot of fun on that.
Yep.
And you can see the delay on the live stream, which is fun. Anyway, thank you guys for joining us. This is the first time that we are going to be doing a live thing on YouTube. If it works out, great. I mean, one of the bad things about this, I guess, is we're kind of going on 30 frames per second, so hopefully it doesn't look like shit. Yeah, right?
Like shit. It's not.
Doesn't look that bad. I mean, it helps that the lighting's now better, and so.
Yeah. See how shitty we look.
Right. Look at my face. All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about number stations. What do you guys actually know about number stations before we get too far into this?
Well, I know there's it's used for spies,
Mhm.
used by spies for secret communication. So could be someone just saying a bunch of numbers, or it could be Morse code or
Songs,
gibberish or
Yeah.
songs. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be listening to a couple later on tonight, and you'll hear actually all of that. It runs from just weird sounds and background noise to actual digitized audio of someone's voice, and you plug in the numbers and you get a different sound from it. So it's really creepy, really interesting, and I love it. So yeah, let's let's get started. What do we actually know about number stations besides it being a shitty John Cusack movie from 2013? Which, I mean, if you like John Cusack, see it. Otherwise, don't.
I like John
I
Cusack,
do.
so I guess I'm gonna go see it.
I go see it. I think it's got. Oh my God, what was her name? From
Joan Cusack.
I do not like those two in movies together. No, she was from the Spider-Man movies. Kirsten Dunst.
We're off track already.
That's a good thing, though.
Anyway, yeah, within the first
That's a plus
5
one to the
minutes.
movie, yeah.
So they're a really old part of spycraft, and they may have been around since at least World War I. Spycraft, or tradecraft as it's known within the intelligence community, has been around for as long as people have wanted to know what another person is planning. It started out just as simple as eavesdropping, someone standing on the other side of a door, just listening to two people talk. Eventually it evolved into notes of those people talking, hidden somewhere for someone else to find. But it had to evolve once someone else found that note who wasn't supposed to. So they created codes to hide the information in that note. And we have evolved from there. Our technology grew and changed as our times evolved, and we wanted to know more about the conversation on the other side of the door. The door. Now we send digital notes with encryptions and fail-safes in drop-dead spots in the middle of public parks. But the special world of number stations is very unique. They're an enigmatic radio signal that we are unsure of, not where they come from, not who's sending them, or what is being said. And after nearly 100 years, we still really have no idea what is being said, or to whom. So, yeah, I mean, World War I was the first time number stations were actually ever reported. It was kind of crazy that that far back, over, 100 years ago, was it now?
Right
About
on.
actually 100.
Yeah. For almost as long as radios have been in existence, number stations have been in existence. It's kind of weird how those two things go hand in hand with each other. And do you guys actually know anything about radio technology and how it all works and stuff like that?
Yes.
Nope.
You do?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Very
Fuck
little.
with you.
Yeah.
I can turn it on in the car.
Yeah.
Okay.
Serious.
Well, we will eventually get to that.
Radio waves bounce off shit, and then it gets received, and then you hear it.
And some
Everything
people
in
can hear them in
between
their fillings.
You know what?
Exactly.
I
It's
have
all
nothing.
about
I have
metal.
nothing
And,
else to add to it.
Yep.
Yeah, metal
Podcast
plates.
over. We
Okay.
solved it.
I actually read that straight out of Webster's.
Oh.
It's a dictionary.
All right, well, let's start with some spy stuff.
Yep.
We cannot stress how powerful espionage and counter-espionage has been to military power since nearly the inception of a military, and since the beginning of what that time, we have employed people who would be willing to go to any lengths to get some sort of edge over their enemies. We still use spies who will infiltrate an enemy country and who will try their best to gain any info they can and send back to their superiors at home. But what has changed over time is the technology used to do that. Let's start around World War I. The Allies had already had a system set up for training agents for espionage and sabotage. Simply, some of them were people deep behind enemy lines and were willing to connect with other people willing to do the same. Sometimes they employed honey traps, who were women who slept with men or seduced them long enough to gain their trust and to get them to spill the beans about troop movement, officer placement, or even the amount of supplies going to the front lines. But not all of the spying took place with pillow talk. The Germans around 1916 had developed the Moritz device. The British had developed a method of sending messages from field telephones in which the ground of the no man's land was used as the natural path for the signal, which I had no idea this actually existed. It was really cool to know that.
What does that even mean?
What they were doing is they were sending the signal through the ground, and with a special receiver also in the ground, they could pick up that signal that was being transferred through the soil. So from one end to the other, they could send messages back and forth. The Germans grew wise to this and developed the Moritz device. They figured out that they were able to tap into the signal by crawling out into the barbed wire and muck into mines that were already present underground, or digging tunnels themselves and placing copper plates which were connected to the Moritz device, allowing the current to be amplified and tapped into by the Germans. But once the Allies figured out that the Germans were listening, they started using codes or sending gibberish, making it useless as a spying device. But this was interesting. This is the first time we listened in on another enemy's signal. It was very interesting. Another German spy working in Britain, born in Peru, used commercial shipping documents to encode messages that would be sent back to Germany. The German spy posed as a merchant shipping canned fish to Peru, but hidden in his invoices for sardines were details for British shipping movements or on the Scottish coast. He was caught when British agents realized that sardines were not in season in the winter, and in a poetic twist, he was executed in the Tower of London just as sardine season was starting up again in April 1916.
Very ironic.
Oh yeah, he died doing what he loved, I guess. So.
Final words were, I hate sardines!
I hate fish! Do you guys know any other... I should ask this. Do you guys know any other spy technologies that were used in World War I and stuff like that?
The Enigma device, was that World War II?
That was World War II.
Okay,
That was a really interesting one. I didn't cover that one in here because that's more of like computer technology than spy technology. I mean, we eventually cracked it, but it was very interesting. Look it up. Look it up if you don't know anything about the Enigma machine. That was very interesting.
Well, no, in Glorious Bastards, they have like these things on the wrist that if you punch it, you also shoot them. It's kind of spyish.
That is.
That was also a World War II movie. When they shot Hitler.
Yeah, and they blew him up.
Shot his face all rubbery.
Oh yeah, love that. All right.
Greatest scene of the movie.
A lot of this sophisticated technology didn't change during World War I. Let's look at the rat bombs. The British Special Operations Executive.
You said rat bomb.
Rat bombs, yeah. It's a kind of.
Wanted movie?
I don't know. Oh God, yeah, you're right. All right, we'll talk about that one because that actually came up a couple times when I was looking for information on this. The British Special Operations Executive was a kind of stay-behind resistance, developed they developed a pretty good idea. Dead rats would be filled with plastic explosives, and then they would be distributed near German boiler rooms. They would be distributed behind enemy lines, and then the spies behind German lines would then place the rats near boilers or in boiler rooms. The idea is that since you don't want a dead rat in your basement, you throw it in the boiler and it burns. Then it explodes. So it was a really good idea. It was crafty. I mean, it was pretty inexpensive. I mean, how cheap is a rat? You just catch one, slice it open, and fill it with plastic explosive. Not that bad.
Easy peasy.
Yeah. I mean, if nobody looks at the rat and they're like, why does it have stitches going from its throat down to its butt? That'd be weird.
Why is this rat ticking?
Yeah. It's got wires sticking out of it. What the hell is this? The sad thing is this brilliant tactic was never used, as the first shipment was found by the Germans. But this resulted in the Germans searching for booby-trapped rats, consuming resources and time. The SEO considered the operation a success. And honestly, this is a tactic used by a lot of spies. It's, counterintelligence, giving them the idea that one thing is going on when it obviously isn't. Misdirecting them to looking into different places, not for your spies, but for something else. And a lot of these times you don't really think it through until your rats are found. So, another silly gadget that the British came up with were overshoes. Since military boot prints would instantly alert you to the fact that a secure area might be not so secure, around that. To cover up the saboteurs' movements, they would strap on rubber shoes shaped to look like footprints made by someone of some of the barefoot locals. The interesting thing about this innovation was that they were strapped backwards to kind of mask their movements.
So it looks like they're going in the opposite direction.
Exactly. And there was no idea, or there was no real idea of how far out into the field this made it, or if it actually did. But the idea that you could leak this information to spies out in the field, and they were talking bars about how they heard about this thing that the Brits were going to be using, you would instantly start looking for these things when they weren't there. It was a really interesting idea, and like again, if this technology never actually made it out there, it's kind of interesting that they actually thought about it. Now, let's take some time to learn how radios work and how spies use them. Are you guys ready to put on your engineering caps?
4-hour podcast.
No. This is not going to be that long. How long have we been recording so far?
38 minutes. Just after the intro.
Barely made it through 1918.
12 minutes. We got this, guys. We're good.
Yeah,
We're
we're still in
streaming
World
on-
War One.
Radios ping off other metal shit, and then it gets heard.
Exactly.
Sound
If you
waves and-
if you strap tin foil to the fillings inside of your mouth, you'll actually get more signal that way
I
in your
always
car.
thought that was made up.
I mean, I've never done it. You could try it.
I don't have any feelings.
I'm getting a
But
filling
do you
Thursday.
see us? Are we?
Oh,
we
God,
live?
I'm getting a filling
We
Thursday.
have
See
one
if they'll
viewer,
strap
and it's me.
Hey, we have
Give me
one.
that 10 on like some FM, please.
Yeah. All right. So, it all started with the investigation into wireless telegraphy. Before radio, we had to send messages through wires, and that would be picked up on the other, or the message would be picked up on the other end of the wire. This was the height of technology around the mid 1800s. At the time, we weren't sure if it was possible to send messages through water, air, or even the earth. So humans set out to figure this little problem out. By 1864, James Clerk Maxwell showed with math that it was possible to theoretically propagate an electromagnetic wave in free space. And radio signals are actually part of the electromagnetic spectrum, along with light and radiation and sound. No, not sound.
Cats.
No,
Unicorns.
they were.
I know.
They were.
Lasers?
Yes, lasers. Absolutely.
Whatever.
Then in 1888, Heinrich Rudolf Hertz proved the theory by transmitting airborne electromagnetic waves. But it wasn't until Italian inventor Guglielmo Marconi, Guglielmo.
He
I don't-
means
I don't-
googly eyes, right?
Yes,
His name
yes.
is Gil.
Invented
Just call him
googly
Gil.
eyes and the radio. Guglielmo Marconi in 1894 built the first complete and successful wireless telegraphy, and it was open season for everyone to figure out a military use for it.
Yeah, how long between the time he invented it and the time it was militarized?
When was World War
8
One?
minutes.
4 minutes?
It was 1894 when he first developed it. So when did World War One start? 1911? 1916? Yeah. So you got a good 20 years of it not being used for anything other than fun stuff.
I'm also not sure about that answer.
Yeah, I don't think
It's 1913, I think.
All right. Well,
1911 too.
I refuse to look it up. So,
Got the phone right here.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Any internet access?
Down here? No, not in the bunker.
Yeah, banka.
This podcast isn't even like going on YouTube.
It's just a closed loop. No one's actually watching it. So how does a radio work? Radio stations, say our local station, Q101, has a radio transmitter. The announcer speaks into the microphone, and their voice gets converted into radio frequencies by oscillating coils and then is sent out into the world. This is picked up by a car radio by tuning to the car's frequency to the frequency of the radio station. Once it is set, you are ready to enjoy some music. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it gives you the idea. Now, most AM and FM stations broadcast on the medium wavelength. They have the best audio quality, although FM has higher fidelity. Now, let's teach you a little bit about long and short wave radios. This is all important. I hope you all know this. Long wave radio frequencies are lower energy. They're the great part about this is that they, with very little energy, you can send information over great distances, and the waves can also follow the curve of the Earth. Being able to talk over mountains and other obstructions, but can also pass out of the atmosphere and bounce off of the ionosphere like light bouncing off of a mirror. The other drawback to this is you need a very large antenna to capture the signal, along with a very large antenna to broadcast the signal. Shortwave radio frequencies are very energetic. While you need to put a little bit more energy into sending the signal over great distances, these waves will reliably bounce off the atmosphere and ionosphere, allowing you to send the signals virtually all over the Earth. The other good thing about this is that you need relatively small antenna to be able to receive signals from all over the world. You can go into Amazon right now and buy a shortwave radio for about $19, which I think I might actually start looking into because this is really cool. But you'd probably want to look something a little bit higher end than the $19 one because they seem to get a bigger distribution of radio signals. Did you guys ever play with shortwave radios when you were a kid?
I think I had a walkie-talkie for like a week.
They got taken away from you.
Too easy.
Yeah, they
I
break
had a
like.
PlayStation and a Nintendo.
Yeah, they really tend to break when you throw it at your brother's head.
Yeah, well, your brother's head or the Nintendo?
Exactly.
This, I have a phone.
All right, now that I've given you a tiny history and a technical lesson, why? Why is any of this important? The fact of the matter is a lot of people don't really know how radios or radio signals work. But knowing that is part of the spycraft work. It's part of the spycraft, and it's not very high tech because shortwave radios are innocuous and are in general not used for global espionage. They can be passed over by police or government agents, or it can be claimed it is just for hobbyists. And in combination with a one-time pad, which is how you get your codes, you can effectively spy for a good long time before anyone has ever found you. And it seems like these stations were set up for this very reason, to pass along information to agents in foreign countries. Now, just because you can broadcast a signal from one side of the world and know it would at some point make it over to where you want it to go, most countries set up stations in locations near to the countries where their agents were in. Let's look at Cuba. Havana is the closest city to the U.S. soil that at about 230 miles, and during the Cold War, having a communist state so close to our front door was pretty alarming. For butt-puckering history look up the Cuban Missile Crisis. You'll find some pretty cool stuff there.
And for a military fuck up, look up the Bay of Pigs.
Yes, absolutely. And we know that
Damn Eastern Central Time.
yeah, right.
Whoops.
Yeah. How is it so hard to just get a time zone correct? All right. Let's see where we're. And we know that there are actually several stations used by the Cubans to coordinate with agents in America. Let's start with the Cuban 5, which is nothing like the Jackson 5. Let's just start there.
Damn, that's the joke I was gonna make.
This spy network, which was part of the WASP network of spies, they honestly seem like they were the B team from everything that I can tell.
The B team.
They actually did not do, from what I can tell, a whole lot of espionage or sabotage. They just infiltrated some low-level government. We'll talk about this in a second. Okay.
Post offices.
They really didn't do a whole lot. They joined a group called the Brothers to the Rescue, who are a group of Cuban exiles that opposed the Castro administration and helped people flee the communist government, which Castro was not fond of. Castro them as a terrorist group, and the Cuban 5 were
his answer to that?
Yeah. They were instructed to try and infiltrate and learn as much about them as possible. The other thing, too, was to infiltrate the group, find out if they had any family left in Cuba, and then they could hold them hostage to stop their help of fleeing Cuban nationals. Yeah. But, you know.
The dick move.
Yeah.
Yeah, Castro, your movie villain.
Yeah. I mean, he was just such a low-level villain. I mean, he wasn't a great guy, but he just didn't do as much as, like, Pol Pot.
Oh, I've played Call of Duty Black Ops, I know.
Number stations, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Make that point. Spoiled it, thank you.
Well,
I had the whole lined up.
So the
Sorry,
The
I
drawing
ruined
board.
from 5 years ago.
So the Cuban 5 were actually accused of helping cause several planes piloted by American citizens who were part of the Brothers to the Rescue group to be shot down by Cuban MiGs, killing 4 U.S. citizens.
Wow.
Yeah, and while they are the biggest known spies to be caught using number stations and one-time pads, they are by no means the only ones that have been caught using number stations. Czech spy Václav Jelinek, nailed it,
You got it.
was
First
caught
try.
in 1988 spying for the KGB. Under the assumed name of Erwin van Harlem, he began spying on
Like
the...
a name.
Oh, yeah. That's a common name in Czech. The Czech Republic?
Van Harlem.
Van Harlem.
I'm sure it's pronounced a little bit different.
Van Harlem Globetrotters.
He began...
Very American.
That's what it came after. He was the first globetrotter.
Oh, there you go. Except, did they have a lot of Czech on the Harlem Globetrotters?
I think they're 100% Czech.
Okay, good.
The Harlem Globetrotters.
Van Harlem.
He started spying on the UK and US from London starting in 1975. And after over 10 years, he was finally arrested using codes from a shortwave radio to follow his superior's orders. And he actually might still be alive. I think he was released like about 6 years ago, and he's living somewhere in the Czech Republic right now.
That's the real punishment.
Yeah. Again, he didn't seem to do a whole lot of damage to the UK or US intelligence network. All of these guys who were caught, good spies don't get caught. They just fade away.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. All of this is so inconsequential.
Yeah. These are all the guys who didn't know what they were doing.
So you don't hear about the
No
guys who
Michael
do.
Weston's here.
No. You do have a Walter...
Talk about the 5 and 6 year old references.
Who's that? What?
Michael Weston, Burn Notice. It's a show that was on USA good 6 years ago.
Bruce Campbell. The only good part of the show.
Never saw it.
It wasn't real good.
Every episode.
I watched it.
Because I have no life.
Oh. Well, then we have Walter Kendall Myers, who also didn't have a life after he was arrested, along with his wife, using a shortwave radio to send signals to Cuba for 30 plus years back in 2009. In 2010, he was sentenced to life in prison, while his wife received 81 months in prison.
Still a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to round it out, 2006, Carlos Alvarez, professor of Florida International University, was arrested for spying on the U.S. for, you guessed it, Cuba, while using a shortwave radio to receive instructions. Cuba does not seem to have a good group of spies with them.
Maybe it has a great group of spies and then like a couple like flunkies.
I don't know, man.
Trainees, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, and what are they? The one thing that I kept like reading, they never mentioned what they passed back to Cuba. What are they trying to like get from us? I understand that they were under embargo for a long time, and they didn't have.
You're still under embargo, I think.
It's loosened up so much though. They have a lot more.
Still.
I know that's true, but I mean, that shouldn't stop them from like. I just don't understand. What are they trying to gain?
Our Wi-Fi password.
There we are.
Yeah, you can hook up to someone's Wi-Fi from 230 miles away.
We'll just run
It's
a
easy.
cable. What was the distance?
Yeah, right. You just get a really big antenna. Now, hand me that speaker over there. I'll splice this in for everybody who's listening to the podcast. But, oh yeah, listen to that. We've got some really cool number stations I want everybody to listen to. I think this is probably one of the coolest things possible. Oh, why, thank you. And if you're wondering why this all seems kind of like thrown together, we don't have a whole lot of money to do all these fancy, splicing together on the fly. So I'm going to have to splice this in on the podcast end of things. So if you're watching on YouTube, check out our podcast. It'll be a little bit more clean cut. We'll cut out all the references to weird.
You can donate for newer equipment.
Yes,
Help us out.
we'll talk about that in a little bit. So in the meantime, listen to a couple number stations. The one that the segue, the one that all of the Cubans were actually accused of using was called the Tension. Its full name is the Tension 3 Finals. I don't know why. Also, all of these songs can be downloaded, or tracks. Yeah, these stations can be downloaded for free from the Conant project.
Are we listening to them live, or is this just a recording from